Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Today we're telling the story of Gord Whitlock, 48 years old, a career cook from Ontario, who spent 30 years in restaurant kitchens before deciding it was time for something else entirely. This is a story about loneliness, about kindness, and about how easy it is to mistake belonging for something that isn't quite what it seems. Gord's going to tell you himself how it started, and I'll just say this. By the time you get to the end, you're going to think differently about what family can cost a man. Before we get into it, quick mention. We've had so many of these stories come through the channel now that we put together a guide pulling together the patterns we keep seeing. It's linked in the description if that's useful to you. All right, here's Gord in his own words. 30 years I was in kitchens. Toronto first, then Ottawa, the last chunk of it. Started as a dish pig, if you can believe that. Worked my way up to line cook, then sous chef at a place on Elgin Street that did pretty well for itself. Good years, some of them. Hard on the body, though. My knees are shot. Left one clicks when I go upstairs. Sounds like a stapler. Back's the same, from bending over hotel pans for 3 decades. You don't notice it happening. And then one day, you're 45, and you can't stand for a 12-hour shift without popping pills just to get through service. I never married. That's not some tragic thing. I want to be clear about that. Nobody died. There's no story there. I just kept putting it off. Every time a woman came round who might have stuck, there was a promotion coming, or a new restaurant opening, or the chef needed me for a busy season. Always something. And you tell yourself, next year, once things settle. Except things in a kitchen never settle. That's sort of the whole point of the job. So the years went by, and I looked up one day and I was 46, and living alone in a basement apartment in Scarborough. And the only people who really knew me were guys I worked 12-hour shifts next to, half of whom had already moved on to other jobs. Got my CPP estimate in the mail around then. You know how that feels? Opening an envelope that's supposed to tell you what your whole life's worth is going to look like going forward. And it's a number that wouldn't cover rent in my own building, let alone anything resembling a life. I sat with that letter for a long time. Didn't do anything about it. Just sat there. A few months after that, I was coming off a double, half dead, scrolling on my phone in bed, the way you do when you're too tired to sleep, but too wired to put the thing down. And this video comes up. Guy standing on a beach somewhere says, "Retire in paradise on $200 a month. Philippines." I remember exactly the thumbnail. Guy in a Hawaiian shirt, drink in his hand, looked like an idiot, honestly. But I watched it anyway. Then I watched another one. Then it was 2 in the morning, and I'd watched maybe a dozen of these things, all pretty much the same. Palm trees, some beachfront condo, locals waving at the camera, guy talking about how far his little pension stretched. I'm not an idiot. I know YouTube's not exactly reality, but I did the math on a napkin, and it wasn't crazy math. I had $12,500 in savings. $12,500. That's it. That's 30 years of cooking for you, plus whatever my pension was going to trickle in. And rent over there, food, all of it. Supposedly a fraction of what I was paying to live in a basement in Scarborough with a landlord who hated me. First real plan I'd had in years. First thing that felt like it was actually mine, not just something I fell into because the schedule worked out that way. I didn't tell anybody I was going. Wasn't dramatic. There just wasn't anybody to tell. No kids, parents long gone. A sister out in Alberta I talked to maybe twice a year. So I gave notice at the restaurant, sold what furniture was worth selling, and I booked a one-way flight to Dumaguete. Didn't even really know where that was on a map until I looked it up. Somebody in a forum said it was quieter than Manila, cheaper than Cebu, good for a guy on a fixed income. Good enough for me. I remember sitting at the gate in Pearson with my one suitcase, and this feeling came over me that was maybe 50% excitement and 50% something closer to dread. And I couldn't tell you which one was bigger. But I got on the plane anyway. 20-some hours later, with a stopover I don't really remember, I landed in this heat that hit me like a wall the second the doors opened. Never felt anything like it. Wet heat sits on you. And that's where it starts, really. That flight. Everything before it was just 30 years of a life that wasn't quite adding up to anything, and everything after it was going to be something else entirely. I didn't know that yet, standing there in that airport with my one suitcase, sweating through my shirt before I'd even found a taxi. I just knew I was somewhere new, and for the first time in a long time. That felt like enough. The heat got me first. Stepped off the plane in Dumaguete, and it was like walking into a kitchen at the end of a Saturday dinner rush. Except there's no walking out of it. No walk-in cooler to step into after. Just wet heat sitting right on your skin, and me standing there in jeans I definitely should not have worn. Suitcase wheels catching on cracked pavement outside the little airport. I'd read some stuff online before I left. Guys saying, grab a tricycle, don't let them rip you off, that sort of thing. So I'm standing there trying to look like I know what I'm doing, and this driver's already got my bag half loaded before I've said a word. Cost me maybe 150 pesos to get into town, less than $4 Canadian, and I remember thinking, well, that's something anyway. That part of the math was right, at least. Found a boarding house near the boulevard, the one that runs along the water there. Fan in the room, no aircon, but it was cheap, 12,000 pesos a month. Call it $270. Guy at the desk called me sir about 4 times in one sentence. I wasn't used to that. Nobody in a Toronto kitchen ever called me sir. They called me a lot of things. Sir wasn't usually one of them. First week or two, I just wandered. Didn't really have a plan, like I said. That's the truth of it. And if I'm being honest with you, that should have told me something right there. 46 years old, showing up somewhere with no plan beyond figure it out. But it felt good, for a bit. Roosters going off at some ungodly hour every morning, jeepneys rattling past belching smoke. This whole rhythm of a place that had nothing to do with me and didn't need anything from me either. First time in years, I wasn't needed by anybody. Took me a while to figure out whether I liked that or hated it. By week 2, the boredom set in proper. A man can only look at a sunset so many times before he starts wanting something to do with his hands. There was a little resort place along the boulevard, nothing fancy, maybe a dozen tables. Did a decent trade with the university crowd and a few expats. I started eating there most days because the sisig was good and cheap, 180 pesos, maybe $4. And the owner, older lady named Elena, she got to talking with me one afternoon. Asked what I did back home. I told her, 30 years of kitchens, and her whole face changed. Turned out her cook had walked out on her 2 weeks before, and she was running the place half-blind. She asked, sort of joking at first, whether I'd want to come have a look at her setup, tell her what she was doing wrong. I went the next day, found about 6 things wrong inside of 20 minutes. Her prep station was a disaster. Her fryer oil hadn't been changed in what looked like a month. She offered me something under the table. Cash plus meals. Call it consulting, she said, though really it was just me fixing her kitchen for something to do. I want to be honest, The money wasn't much. But it wasn't about the money. It felt like being useful again. I hadn't realized how much I missed that until it was back. That's where I met Marife. She ran the front of house for Elena, her cousin, turned out. First time I really talked to her was over the pass. She came back to grab an order and caught me muttering to myself about the state of the walk-in. And she just laughed, said something like, "You're too serious back here, Kuya. This isn't Ottawa." I don't even remember telling her I was from Ottawa. Maybe Elena mentioned it. Anyway, I laughed too. First real laugh I'd had in longer than I wanted to admit. Next couple weeks, we just fell into something easy. She'd take me round the wet market on my days off, show me where to get real bagoong instead of the bottled stuff, correct my Tagalog when I butchered it, which was constantly. She had this way of teasing that never felt mean. I looked forward to those mornings more than I probably should have admitted to myself at the time. After years of standing next to guys who barely spoke to me over a hot line, here was somebody who actually wanted to know things about me, asked questions, remembered the answers. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I saw where any of this was going. I didn't. I just knew it felt good, and it had been a long time since anything had. End of that second month, Marife invites me out to her family's place, a barangay a bit outside the city proper. Sunday lunch, she says, meet everyone. And I remember standing in that little room getting ready, actually nervous, like I hadn't been nervous meeting somebody's family since I was about 20 years old. Didn't have the faintest idea what I was walking into. Just knew I wanted to go. The barangay was maybe 20 minutes out of town by tricycle, down a road that turned from paved to gravel to something that was mostly just packed dirt, with potholes big enough to lose a tire in. Marife rode behind me, calling out directions to the driver in Bisaya, and I remember watching the houses change the further we got from the city. Concrete blocks giving way to places with corrugated tin roofs, chickens wandering across the road like they owned the place, a couple of kids playing basketball on a court that was really just a slab of concrete with a rusted hoop bolted to a coconut tree. Her family's place was small. 2 rooms, maybe, plus a covered area out front where all the actual living happened. Her mother was already cooking when we pulled up, and the smell hit me before I'd even gotten off the tricycle. This rich pork smell, adobo I found out later, plus something with tamarind in it, sinigang, and rice going in a pot the size of something you'd see in my old kitchen, except over a little gas burner instead of a 6-burner range. I want to tell you, I walked in there with my guard up. I didn't. That's just the truth of it. Her mother hugged me like I was her own son, already met me twice. Her nieces, 2 little girls, maybe 6 and 8, climbed right up on me while I was still standing there holding a bag of pandesal I'd brought because somebody told me you don't show up empty-handed. By the end of that lunch, her father, quiet guy, spent 30 years on a fishing boat. By the look of his hands, he's calling me anak, son, just like that, over a plate of adobo and some San Miguel he'd pulled out special. And here's the thing, and I think about this a lot now. Before I left Canada, I read some of those forum threads, the ones warning guys about all this. Fake profiles, months of chatting online before anybody even meets. Some girl in Cebu, who's actually got 3 other foreign boyfriends, all sending her money for the same sick mother. I read all that, and I sat there at that table thinking, well, this isn't that. There's no dating app here, no months of texting some stranger's photo. This is a real family, real house, real kids climbing on me, real food her mother made with her own hands. I could see it, touch it, laugh with it. Felt like proof, almost. Like I'd found the one situation that wasn't like the horror stories. I didn't clock, not for a long while, that a family being real doesn't mean the money isn't still going to move the same way it always does. A few weeks after that lunch, we're having dinner, just the two of us this time, at a little carinderia near her place, and Marife mentions, real casual, over her plate of pancit, that her mother's diabetes medicine ran out. Insulin's expensive here if you don't have the right coverage, and the pharmacy wanted 15,000 pesos up front before they'd fill it again. 15,000 pesos. I did the math without even trying anymore. It was starting to come natural. That's about 340 bucks Canadian. And I didn't hesitate. Didn't even really think about it as a decision. Just paid it. Felt good, if I'm honest. Felt like I mattered to something bigger than myself, for the first time in longer than I want to admit. That's around when Marife started using this phrase, utang na loob, said it like it explained something, a debt of gratitude, she called it. The idea that when somebody helps your family, you carry that. You owe it back somehow, sometime. She wasn't threatening me with it or anything. Want to be clear about that. She said it more like she was teaching me something about her world. And I took it that way too. Just a fact of how things worked here. Same as roosters at 4 in the morning, or taking your shoes off at the door. I didn't know yet how many more times I'd hear that phrase before this was through. Typhoon season came in around September that first year, and I remember the sky over Dumaguete turning this weird green-gray a couple days before it actually hit. Everybody battening down shutters, stocking up on rice and sardines like it was the end of the world. Marif's family place, being what it was, tin roof, cinder block walls only halfway up in the back room, took a beating during the storm that blew through. Wasn't a direct hit, wasn't a disaster movie, just enough wind and rain to peel back a section of that roof and let the whole back room flood. She called me the morning after, crying a little on the phone. First time I'd heard her actually cry. And I remember standing there in my boarding house room with the fan going, feeling this thing in my chest that I can only describe as needing to fix it. Not wanting to, needing to. That's an important distinction, I think, looking back. The roof was going to cost 80,000 pesos to properly repair, corrugated sheets plus labor plus somebody to fix the wiring that had gotten wet. 80,000 works out to about 1,800 Canadian. That's not nothing. That's real money for a guy living off consulting cash and a small pension. But I paid it inside of 2 days. Went to a Cebuana Luilier branch near the market to wire it through, because it felt like the kind of thing you don't sit on when a family's roof is open to the sky. I want to be honest about something here. Part of me, and I'm not proud of this, part of me liked being the guy who could fix it. 30 years standing at a pass, barking orders, nobody ever really needed me for anything bigger than getting the mise en place done on time. Here was a family with an actual hole in their roof, and I was the reason it got patched. That felt like something. I know how that sounds now. Didn't then. Come around month 8. I'm sitting with Marife's mother one evening, and she's talking, sort of proud, about her youngest, Marife's brother, doing well in school, wants to study business at the local college. Tuition's 120,000 pesos a year, she says, not asking me directly, more just talking, the way people talk about things they wish they could afford. Marife picks it up later that night, tells me straight out, family helps family, and you're part of the family now, Gord. Said my name like it meant something extra when she used it. 120,000 pesos a year. That's about 2,700 Canadian a year. And I agreed to cover it going forward. I remember doing the math that same week, actual math, pen and paper, sitting on the edge of my bed. $12,500 I'd come over with, already down more than I wanted to admit. And instead of that number scaring me straight, it just sort of settled into me as the new normal. This is what it costs to have people, I told myself. Every other version of my life, the version where I stayed in Ottawa alone in that basement apartment, cost nothing and got me nothing back either. There was a Brit, older fella, Callum, used to sit at the same breakfast spot most mornings, tapsilog and coffee, and he made some comment once about Kano generosity being the local currency around here. Said it with a laugh, not mean exactly, but I remember bristling at it a little. Told myself he was just bitter. One of those guys who'd been burned once and now saw ghosts everywhere. I didn't think about that comment again for a long while. Not long after, Marife and I are lying in bed one night, and she starts talking about the future. First time either of us used that word out loud. Said her family's little sari-sari store, the one her mother ran near the house, could really take off if it just had a bit more stock. A proper freezer, maybe expand into the empty lot next door. Said it's soft, not like a pitch, more like a dream she was letting me in on. I remember lying there in the dark, thinking, well, why not? The store expansion talk didn't stay talk for long. Within a couple of weeks, Marife's mother had a contractor lined up, a cousin's husband who did concrete work, and the number came in at 180,000 pesos for the build-out, adding a proper storefront, a second-hand chest freezer, more stock on the shelves. 180,000, call it 4,000 Canadian, which was more than I had sitting free at that point. So instead of just writing a check like the roof or the tuition, I co-signed a small loan through a local lending outfit, one of those rural bank branches with the fluorescent lights and the queue that never moves. Marif's name was on it too, but the collateral, such as it was, ran through me. My consulting income, my pension deposits, whatever paper trail I had. I remember signing that paperwork at a little folding table set up under a tarp because the actual office was too small to fit us all. And Marife's father shook my hand after, like we'd just closed some big deal. Like I was a business partner now and not just a guy who fixed her cousin's kitchen fryer. Felt good in the moment. I'll say that honestly. Felt like maybe this was the thing that would actually pay me back, not just emotionally, but for real. Dividends. A stake in something. First time since I sold off my furniture in Scarborough that I thought maybe I'd made a smart move instead of just a hopeful one. For a while, things did seem to hum along. The store did decent trade. I'd stop by sometimes and see actual customers in there, buying rice and Coke and load for their phones. Marif stayed affectionate. We kept up the same rhythm we'd had from the start. Market trips, her correcting my Tagalog, Sunday visits to the barangay. But somewhere in there, small cracks started showing, and I want to be honest that I saw them and mostly talked myself out of caring. Money from the store never seemed to make it back to me in any form I could actually point to. I'd ask, casual, "How's the store doing?" And I'd get a number that sounded fine, but there was never a ledger I saw, never an actual accounting. A repayment date on the loan came and went without anybody mentioning it, and when I brought it up, gentle, not accusing, Marife got vague, said something about restocking costs eating into it, said it in a tone that told me the conversation was over before I'd really started it. I told myself, that's just how business works here, family business especially. You don't nickel and dime your own people over receipts. Another version of that same phrase kept coming back to me, utang na loob, like it was supposed to cover whatever gap I was noticing and not asking too hard about. I want to be clear with you watching this, because I think this is the part people skip over when they tell these stories. I wasn't a fool the whole way through. There was a version of me, sitting in that boarding house some nights, doing the math again on a legal pad, who knew something wasn't adding up right. I just didn't have the stomach to follow that thought all the way to its end. Too much of me was already in it. Too much money, sure, but more than that. Too much of what I'd started believing about myself. That I mattered somewhere. That I had people. Callum, that Brit from the breakfast place, he'd been making these little comments for a while by then. Nothing direct, just this dry, running joke about foreign generosity being the local currency. I'd mostly laughed it off, figured he was just a bitter old expat who'd had his own bad luck and needed someone to blame it on. But one morning, maybe a year and 2 months in, he didn't make a joke. He set his coffee down, looked at me straight, and said he needed to tell me something about Marif's family, and that I probably wasn't going to like hearing it. That's when things needed sorting out proper. What I'm saying is, this isn't new for you. I watched it happen with 2 other blokes before you. Same family. Near enough the same story. Same roof. Same store. I remember I had a spoonful of eggs halfway to my mouth when he said that, and I just sort of set the fork back down. Didn't say anything for a second. Callum kept going. Not cruel about it. More the way you'd tell a mate his car's about to fail inspection. Matter of fact. Like it pained him a bit to be the one saying it. He said there was a Dutchman, few years back, funded almost the same roof repair on that same house. Different section maybe, but same house, same mother, with the same diabetes story. And an Australian after him put money into the same sorry store, different expansion, same pitch about dividends that never came. Both of them gone now, back to their own countries. Neither one talking about it much from what Callum heard, which I understand now. Shame's a quiet thing. You don't exactly post about it on Facebook. I sat there in that plastic chair, the ceiling fan going overhead, some rooster still going off somewhere even though it was past 9 in the morning, and I felt this cold thing spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the aircon, because there wasn't any. I didn't argue with him, didn't defend her. I just said thanks for telling me, paid for my coffee, and went back to the boarding house. That night, I pulled every bank statement and remittance receipt I'd kept since I landed. I'm not an organized man by nature. Kitchen guys aren't. We work off memory and muscle. But I'd kept the receipts. Some instinct in me must have known I'd need them one day. Laid them all out on the bed, in order, and started adding. 15,000 for the insulin, 80,000 for the roof, 120,000 a year for tuition. Time's going on 2 years now. 180,000 for the store, plus what I'd been quietly sending on top of that for stock and small emergencies I hadn't even bothered writing down properly because they'd felt too small to matter individually. I added it all up twice because I didn't believe the first number, 850,000 pesos, just about 19,000 Canadian dollars, in under 2 years. I'd come over with 12,500 in savings, and I was $7,000 past that, into debt, into a co-signed loan that was never going to be repaid by anybody but me. I sat on the edge of that bed a long time. Didn't cry, if you're wondering. I've never been much of a crier. Comes from 30 years of being told to suck it up and finish the ticket. I just sat there feeling like somebody had scooped something out of me. Next day, I went to find Marif. She was at the store, restocking a shelf with cans of corned beef, and I asked her straight, no preamble, whether it was true, whether there had been others before me who'd paid for that same roof, that same store. I watched her face while I asked it, waiting for shock, denial, something. She didn't do any of that. She just kept stacking the cans, didn't even really stop what she was doing, and said, "Everyone needed help, Gord." She said it soft, not cold exactly, but with this practicality that hit harder than anger would have. Said I was never forced to give anything. Said it like that settled the matter entirely, like I was the one being unreasonable for bringing it up. I stood there in that little store with the smell of dried fish and detergent in the air, some kid outside bouncing a basketball off the concrete, and I understood, for the first time, really understood, that whatever this had been to me, it hadn't cost her a single sleepless night. There was no scene, no tears, no pleading. Just a woman going back to stacking cans while I stood there holding the wreckage of 2 years in my hands. I moved for a couple weeks after that, into a room above a hardware shop closer to the market. Cheaper than the boarding house, no fan even, just a window that looked out on a wall. Picked up whatever cooking shifts I could find, a couple nights a week at a place run by another expat. Cash in hand. Nothing steady. Ate one real meal most days. Kept it simple, rice, and whatever was cheap that morning at the wet market. Stopped watching those retirement videos entirely. Haven't opened YouTube on my phone past the weather app in longer than I can remember. I've had time to sit with all of it since. I don't think Marifé hated me, if that's what you're waiting to hear. I don't think it was ever quite that simple. Her or her family sitting around plotting how to work some lonely Canadian cook. Some of what happened there was real. Her mother did need that medicine. The roof did need fixing. Her brother probably is doing fine in school on my dime, and I can't even be angry about that part, not really. But I also know now that a family being real and a family being run like a business aren't opposites. Both things were true at the same time, and I was too starved for somebody calling me Anak to ask the harder questions early on. I think about Callum's joke, the one about Kano generosity being the local currency, and how long I let myself believe he was just bitter. He wasn't bitter. He was right. And being right doesn't always look like malice. Sometimes it just looks like a guy who's seen the pattern enough times to recognize it walking toward him with a fresh face on it. I didn't want to see the pattern, because seeing it meant admitting I wasn't special to her, and I'd built 2 years of my life around being special to somebody. If there's a lesson in this, and I've had plenty of quiet nights to work one out, it's this. Paradise doesn't run on hope. It runs on the same math as everywhere else, and if you're not watching the ledger, somebody else is watching it for you, and not necessarily in your favor. Family, real or otherwise, doesn't hand itself to a man for free. You pay for belonging one way or another, everywhere, always. I just didn't think to ask what the bill would look like until it was already 3 years past due. That's Gord's story, and I think what stays with me about it is how ordinary the whole thing sounds when you break it down. No villain twirling a mustache, no single lie that unravels everything. Just a lonely man, a family with real needs, and a slow accumulation of kindness that never got questioned until it was too late to matter. That's usually how these stories go. Not one big betrayal, but 100 small reasonable ones, stacked until they're not reasonable anymore. Stories like Gord's are why we put this guide together. Everything we've learned from the people who've shared what went wrong, all in one place. It's in the description if it's something you need. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. This has been Inside the Philippines.